Please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Nowakowski for his presentation, Beauty, Discernment, and the Creative Imperative, the Dignity in the Vocation of a Sacred Artist.
Good afternoon. I was going to start with a Hail Mary because it's easy to pray together. As a musician, I like things to happen together. But my wife says, no, do the Anima Christi. So if you'd join me with a quick Anima Christi out loud or in the quiet of your heart, I'd appreciate that. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Soul of Christ, sanctify me. Body of Christ, save me. Blood of Christ, inebriate me. Water from Christ, wash me. Ashes of Christ, strengthen me. O good Jesus, hear me. Within thy wounds hide me. Permit me never to be separated from you. From the wicked enemy defend me. The hour of my death upon me. So that thy saints and angels may praise thee forever and ever. Amen. That was good. We all stayed together. So friends, colleagues, it's an honor to be here today. I begin by recalling my last-minute trip to attend the very first Catholic Art Student Conference in Chicago. What was that, 2017, 18? I don't remember anymore. Kathleen, what was the first conference?
2017.
17. And I was thrilled to be able to attend. And what I encountered on that day was eye-opening and encouraging. There was in that room the necessary artistic community to enact what Duncan Strike was just talking about, a North American Catholic Renaissance. And the numbers and ability level are accounted for here today. And on that day and in the subsequent conferences I attended, as the conversations progressed, I realized that most of us struggled with the same day-to-day difficulties, practical, spiritual challenges, regardless of what state and part our respective careers might be in. And many of us had been put in a situation where we also had to find a way to pursue beauty and create art, even through great personal tragedy, right? And yet it's a miracle. What a miracle it is that despite all of these difficulties, despite sometimes direct opposition from the people you would expect would support us, we persevere in the pursuit of beauty. And I think it may be that because, unlike our colleagues in the secular art world, we don't always think of ourselves as having careers, but we think of ourselves as having vocations. And I think the pursuit of beauty may be our life's vocation. So whether it is your life's vocation, or you think it may become your life's vocation, or you're someone that could support the vocation of others, this is the talk I wish to give about the nature and dignity of the sacred arts vocation, and how it has particular importance in this time in history. And I ask some indulgence of you to share some of the thoughts that I've been thinking about since that first conference, things that have sustained me through the seasons of life as I continue to try to be a composer, despite life not wanting me to do that very often. And perhaps you'll grow some inspiration from this as well. I'm always jealous of the artists and architects that get to come up here and show all of their beautiful pictures and plans, and it's all very inspiring. So I'm going to try to play a little bit of music here. It might be very quiet. If it is, I apologize, so listen in. This was a piece I did just about a year ago. It was a setting of the Seven Last Words of Christ that was commissioned by the Orchestra Kamerata Stargard, which is a relatively new chamber orchestra in my mother's hometown of Poland. So after the concert, I had these little old ladies coming up to me asking me if I'm Danusha's son. I used to play with her on the playground. It was a surreal experience, but it turns out it was a wonderful performance. And we've recorded this, and I traveled there twice more, and this will hopefully be approved as an album release by the label next week. So go on my Facebook, and maybe in a couple weeks I'll be able to tell you when this is available commercially. So I'll play a little bit. This is Ecce Mater Tua. I just finish, when the music begins and it fades, and we just finished a little instrumental interlude meditating on the sadness of Mary and the women at the foot of the cross. And here Christ gives us his mother. Hopefully you could hear some of that. It also gives the opportunity to decide whether or not you're going to listen to me or tune out everything I say after that. So up to you. After that concert, I was standing with the pastor of that particular church, thanking him for providing the space. He didn't want to turn on the heat, though. That's where those fire lamps were from. And this little old lady comes up to us and says, she gets in the pastor's face, all like 5'1" of her with a cane, and she says, "Now that's what our Lenten processions should sound like." And she huffs and walks around. So there we are. So. So is there such a thing as a Catholic artistic vocation in the spiritual sense? I know as Catholics, we are sometimes apt to argue about what really does or does not constitute a proper vocation. I'm going to make the apologia in the affirmative. And I'd like to start in 1995 on this campus when the Polish composer Henryk Górecki came to visit to receive an honorary doctorate in music. He was just a few years removed from the mega success of the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs, which crossed over actually into the pop charts and dethroned albums by Prince and Madonna. It is possible. And during his acceptance speech, he only really said one thing about himself, and that's the way he always was. He said, struggling with these 12 notes and these handful of musical instruments, it's not so important what I did with these musical notes or how I did it, but rather, is there a something within and between and behind those notes? That is what matters. Per his fashion, he pointed away for himself and began to quote copiously from the words of his friend Pope John Paul II, who had commissioned him when he was still Cardinal of Krakow, was shortly elevated to the papacy, and this put Górecki in trouble with the communist authorities at the time, got him removed from his rectorship of the Academy of Music in Katowice. But artists, authentic and humble, John Paul II said, certainly realize that no matter what kind of beauty would characterize their handiwork, they know that their paintings, sculptures, and creations are nothing else but a reflection of God's beauty. I think if we examine the late Pope's writings further, we come to a document most of you are doubtless familiar with, the Letter to Artists. I find that a lot of the younger artists, the student artists, this is not on your radar anymore. So go online and look up John Paul II's Letter to Artists if you haven't read it. And there is a section called The Special Vocation of the Artist. So I guess that settles the conversation. In this section, he defines the vocational artist as someone who can respond to the demands of art and faithfully accept art's specific dictates. Later on, John Paul writes that the artist has a special relationship to beauty. In a very true sense, it can be said that beauty is the vocation bestowed on him by the Creator in the gift of artistic talent. And certainly this, too, is a talent which ought to be made to bear fruit in keeping with the sense of the gospel parable of the talents. That's perilous for us. I think we need to note that in citing the parable of the talents, we're given to know that we not only have a vocation, but one for which we may bear a grave responsibility, hence the need for discernment. We don't have time here, but if you go through all the documents that Pope Benedict XVI wrote during his papacy and his various meetings with artists, I think you'll find similar sentiments echoed. So how about the status of the artistic vocation outside of the opinion of recent popes? Holy Scripture certainly aids us in our case. We heard some of this spoken about by the speakers yesterday. In the Old Testament, we can point to the specific technical wishes for the Ark of the Covenant or the temple. These were precise instructions for which skilled craftsmen were needed. And we should also note that these were already established skilled tradesmen that God pointed out by name. Quality and ability preceded the ability to pursue the sacred vocation. It's not the other way around. A much lesser quoted example, but one that I really like, comes from First Chronicles, where King David assigns specific responsibilities to the temple musicians. And the musicians were exempt from other temple responsibilities, so they could dedicate themselves to their liturgical task, and they were even provided housing. In the New Testament, of course, we are not lacking of examples. My favorite moment, outside of the Transfiguration, that is the story of the woman with the alabaster jar. You all recall, the woman comes to Jesus, breaks open the jar, puts the costly ointment on his feet, and lovingly worships the Lord. So human creativity, human ingenuity, matched with a sincere heart, sacrifice at the feet of Christ. What of the spirit of practicality? That which would deny or curtail such lavish worship in favor of more productive distribution of resources. Could not such resources be better spent helping the poor? That was Judas speaking, and this betraying spirit is still with us today, hampering every good effort for beauty, often now aided by what I think are false interpretations of social justice unmoored from spiritual primacy. The mass comes first. Our collective Christian history witnesses to the validity of the artistic vocation, and as art is something more than a hobby that you do when you're not at your real job. Europe, the Middle East, and parts of the United States are covered in great works of architecture, full of breathtaking art within. They witness the unbroken tradition of sacred art in the church, and whether these artists are famous in name or forgotten, like many of the artists who worked on this, our mother church of the organization, St. John Cantus in Chicago, their works still draw people to the foot of the cross, the beginning of belief and sustenance through deeply trying or wonderful times. And the artists themselves, historically, they've benefited from the patronage of the church. It's a natural relationship, which is why John Paul II wrote, "The church needs art and art needs the church." Art and the creative urge, when encountered as a deep compulsion matched with ability, is God asking a question which demands of us a sincere and unflinching commitment in order that we may even attempt to answer it. The witness of our tradition is clear. Some are called to art as a spiritual vocation in the service of the church. That's the easy part of this talk. More difficult is to discuss the nature of this vocation and how we can approach it today. I'd like to suggest that sacred art can be defined as a broad category of activity, encompassing everything from strictly liturgical art to art which has a religious orientation. Many Catholic artists will also work on non-liturgical and secular projects, yet their ontological orientation may not change just because their subject matter is not strictly religious. The integrated Catholic artist, I think, cannot help but allow the imprint of the sacred to find its way into his work. Goretzky's aforementioned Symphony of Sorrowful Songs, not a liturgical work, or Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, two famous examples. I'm sure you can all think of many more. In this light, my own definition of sacred art as a vocation includes anyone who pursues the person of beauty through the arts of the beautiful as a way of life. Why person of beauty? What requires a moment or more of unpacking is the question of the nature of beauty itself. Thankfully, I can do this very quickly. That's a joke. Of course not. No, one can no more easily explain beauty than you can explain the Holy Spirit. Right? We've tried to. Endless reams of information. We've tried to, but we can't do it. And it strikes me that this is probably very much by design. Man is able to peer now across the universe at other galaxies, but cannot say why he may find a particular painting, or his spouse for that matter, to be beautiful, and why the word beautiful would even be used. Thankfully, antiquity and the pre-modern church has given us some tantalizing frameworks which often overlap and can provide interesting guide rails that we can at least consider using in our own development and discernment. So permit now a composer to bumble through a little bit of philosophy. If I make any mistakes, that's fine. Plenty of philosophers have made mistakes about art as well. So I begin with Plato's Ladder of Love, one of my favorites. This is presented, if you don't know, in the Symposium by Diotima. And the Ladder of Love is a metaphorical ascent describing the soul's progression from base physical desire of, say, a single body, to noticing that all bodies are beautiful, to admiring societies, institutions, ideas, and ultimately beauty itself. Near the culmination of the dialogue, Diotima says that the artist may continue, being not like a servant in love with the beauty of one person or institution, himself a slave, mean and narrow-minded, but drawing towards and contemplating the vast sea of beauty, he will create many fair and noble thoughts and notions and boundless love of wisdom, until on that shore he grows and waxes strong, and at last the vision is revealed to him of a single science, which is the science of beauty everywhere. Plato envisions the journey of the perception of beauty as one that ends up on the shore of the vast sea of beauty itself, the vast sea of beauty. What beauty itself really is, I don't think he could know. We needed the incarnation to provide that answer. Oh, that was the quote. We shift our gaze forward a little bit to the writings of Augustine and Boethius on the subject. We see a similar sort of Pythagorean structure, which these men in turn called musica. For both Augustine and Boethius, musica is far more than the art of audible sound. In fact, audible sound performed music was the lowest form of musica. It is rather a reflection of cosmic and moral order. Augustine, in Book 6 of his De Musica, which I think he wrote before he converted, frames musica as the discipline of number and proportion governing rhythm and harmony, ultimately directing the mind towards eternal truth and God. For Augustine, music educates desire by aligning the soul with divine order, itself a Platonic idea. Boethius, in Book 1 of his De Institutione Musica, systematizes this idea into a threefold hierarchy: musica mundana, or universalis, which is really the harmony of the cosmos, the music of the laws of reality, if you will, moving down to musica humana, the harmony of body and soul itself, with itself, but then also with the higher ideals of musica mundana, and finally musica instrumentalis, which is written in theoretical music and most lowly performed music, as an expression of the entire structure. I think you can lay the framework of musica over the idea of Plato's ladder of love in a very coherent way. What's different, however, is that Boethius and Augustine are now working through an incarnational framework, meaning that we're not only dealing with an ascent to beauty, but beauty is descending to us in return. It's a two-way street, and the one pursuing beauty may stop anywhere along the way, on any rung of the ladder of love, on any part of the structure of musica, and contemplate with fullness the source of beauty. God's grandeur may be discerned in a simple flower, or a symphony, or the spiral of a galaxy. Now enter the person of beauty. Dated to the late 5th or 6th century, Pseudo-Dionysius, the Areopagite, wrote his treatise, The Divine Names, and it meditates upon how the various names attributed to God in Scripture, such as the good, the light, love, point anagogically to divine attributes, allowing us to speak coherently through the nature about God by observing him through his own self-revelation. Discerning further names for God, he very quickly comes to the name of beauty. In section 7 of his Divine Names, he writes, "But the beautiful and beauty are not to be divided as regards the cause, which has embraced the whole in one. For with regard to all created things, dividing them into participations and participants, we call the beautiful which participates in beauty, but beauty the participation of the beautifying cause of all the beautiful things." In other words, God is beauty, and all the forms that he has created bear his imprint. Notice that in this translation, the B in beauty is capitalized, not unlike small t and capital T, truth or tradition. This is an essential moment as it identifies all beauty with the person of beauty himself, God, with all that can be called beautiful, emerging and returning to him. A bit later, we have St. Thomas Aquinas, who, aside from Aristotle and Scripture, actually quoted Dionysius the most and wrote a lengthy commentary on Dionysius' divine name treatise. And Aquinas deduced that the beautiful is convertible with the good and the true, and that God is beauty in himself, being also the source of all radiance, harmony, and integrity. There's that formula. And I don't know if you've noticed, the various formulas for beauty or effective art that have been thrown around so far during this conference all seem to be tripartite in nature. I don't think that's a coincidence as well. On the left, I had to advertise it. There's a book I just finished by Brendan Thomas Salmons about Dionysius and St. Thomas Aquinas and the divine names, specifically focusing on beauty. I found mostly very accessible and beautiful to meditate upon. Roughly contemporaneous to Aquinas, we have Bonaventure, who described beauty, God as the fountain fullness of beauty. Right? So I think from the antiquity to the scholastics, the philosophers and the philosopher saints have given us a structure that we can all work with to help ourselves in our prayerful discernment of how to pursue beauty in our own careers, in our own vocations, What about the mystics? I think the mystics are the proof testers of all theology and philosophy. We know the famous quote, "Late have I loved you, O beauty ever ancient, ever new. Late have I loved you," St. Augustine mourning in his Confessions. St. John of the Cross in his ecstatic mystic poetry writes, "God passes through the thicket of the world. Wherever he passes, his glance turns all things to beauty." St. Teresa of Avila, in attempting to describe her visions of Jesus, repeatedly uses the label beauty. At one point she writes, "It's true that afterwards the vision is forgotten, but there remains so deep an impression of the majesty and beauty of God that it's impossible to forget it." I think as artists, we often experience something like this. There's something in the in the mind's eye that we've reached up to seize, and no matter what we do, what we bring down with us, it's never as good as the original vision. And in the last century, St. Faustina Kowalska in her diary writes, "O beauty uncreated, who comes to know you once can love nothing else." I like that one so much I set it to music. So the mystics knew who beauty was. There's a Polish scholar, Antina Karpowicz-Binkowska. That's a big name, so if you're curious, I can always send it to you later. She's a wonderful author who I credit with bringing a lot of these ideas to my attention, and whose excellent works, I hope, are soon translated into English. It'd be nice to find the funds for that. She calls Pope Benedict XVI the Boethius of our time, and copiously documents his pursuit and meditations upon beauty in a way that a lot of other commentators on his papacy overlook. She drew my attention to a 2002 address called "The Feelings of Things, the Contemplation of Beauty," where Benedict quotes, the 14th century Byzantine theologian Nicholas Kabasilius. It reads, "When men have a longing so great that it surpasses human nature and eagerly desire and are able to accomplish things beyond human thought, it is the bridegroom who has smitten them with this longing. It is he who has sent a ray of his beauty into their eyes. The greatness of their wound already shows the arrow which has struck home. The longing indicates who has inflicted the wound. God," says Benedict, "smites us with the love necessary to pursue beauty." Or, "Only the lover sings," as Joseph Pieper says. So the philosophers and mystics give us a clear picture. God is beauty. Now, outside of architecture, most of what we would call today the fine arts were not at that time fully developed or fully redeveloped during roughly the beginning of the scholastic era. Right? Painting had a while to go, music had a long while to go. And after the scholastic, it seems like much of the Catholic philosophical discussion about beauty slowed dramatically. And I'd like to submit that we stopped talking about beauty so much because we were in a culture where we were busy doing beauty. The church, during these fruitful years, was firmly engaged in her role as patron of the arts. And it persisted up until the modern era and the deconstruction and experiments that we endured, including a lot of those let in through the ecclesial back door by post-conciliar excess. Hence, here we are again, gathering in places like these and events like these, talking about beauty and what to do about it. So I'd like to submit that the pursuing of beauty himself through the arts of the beautiful should be a sufficient justification for the valuing and robust support of artistic vocations in the church. No other argument should ever be needed. I don't know what else we could possibly add to this. However, there's always a however, our times have, I think, old challenges presented in new and novel ways. I'd like to suggest that we can experience and also put forth a greater urgency of the artistic vocation by exploring these issues: perception, spiritual orientation, rootedness, authenticity, coherence, and attention. In the interest of time, I'm just going to make a brief pass at each one. First, perception. So we do live in a gilded age of digital magnificence. We were talking yesterday about how a lot of the best artists and even classically trained architects are going to comic book companies and video game companies to have some place to ply their art. The academies won't have them, the galleries won't have them. But we also find ourselves in a dark age that is in constant need of this digital diversion to avoid the creeping despair which seems to be its universal fruit. We're distracted by this glowing artifice, and modern man often does not expect that his aesthetic experience will proceed farther than a short, pleasant distraction, nor does he dare suspect that his attention is meant for more than the banal. There's a fog of war which is very deep, and our perception is clouded. The propaganda of banality is expertly crafted and is difficult to dislodge from the contemporary mind, especially if that modern mind fancies itself to be educated or enlightened. The casualty of this tragic distraction is often our clarity of perception. By contrast, authentic art is a valueless commodity, initially at least, and it is the focusing of an individual upon an instance of material formation, and it can provide at the very least something unique in a desert of otherwise plastic conformity. Art at its baseline insists on the perception of the individual in contrast to that of corporate participation. It asserts individual dignity merely by being attempted. Sacred art can then take this action and create uniqueness and direct it towards the horizon of God's self-revelation. And we can even talk about how, I think, especially in pop music, there is a counterfeit of the individuality of art. The individuality, which doesn't in reality exist, is often the first thing that's sold to the masses. So in a world of flattened perceptions, it's the artist who can call us towards a depth of vision rooted in the dignity of the individual. And in a world of reduced aesthetic expectations, it's the sacred artist that can show us not only the dignity of the artist, but the dignity of him towards which the artwork points. Spiritual orientation. Benedict XVI said that the church's chief proofs of concept, if you will, are the saints and the work of artists. And I was shocked when I read that the first time. When the church has amnesia about half that formula, she's only going to be operating at about 50% evangelical potency. So I learned as a younger man, returning to the church towards the end of college, that you just have to lift the lid a little bit on the deposit of the faith, and you'll be overwhelmed by the radiance of truth. Sacred art is not strictly a part of this deposit of faith, but is a perennial partner in the witnessing of revelation. Catholicism, pursued even with austere minimalism, is ravishingly beautiful and is a natural partner to art. Art needs the church, church needs art, John Paul II said. And the presence of ambitious sacred art is a feature of the faith, not an accident. Benedict said, Pope Benedict, true knowledge is being struck by the arrow of beauty that wounds man. The wound in beauty, in turn, orients us towards the source of beauty himself. In stark contrast, today's culture presents us with the counterfeit of healthy orientation. It seeks to distract us from our wound of beauty, or to spin us so fast in the circle that those attempted arrows of beauty cannot cleanly land. We have new drugs to build false peace, pornography to build false intimacy, fast food to imitate sustenance, political outrage to create fake religious fervor, unlimited streaming content for fake repose, video games for fake achievement, mass-produced goods for fake luxury, and now radical personal expressions of identity as what I think is a demonic inversion of the radical personal sacrifice of the priesthood. We can also take just a brief moment, if you will, to address the phenomenon of blasphemous art. Art which mocks the faith is nothing new, even if its ferocity is particularly intense at this point. But something that concerns me equally to this is the fact that most of the same Catholics who raise the alarm on blasphemous art do nothing to contribute to the creation of a good Catholic culture of art in return. We have 1 billion Catholics in the world, and we can't fund consistently one good film. Can they each give $1? Be great. Somehow money for pop concerts can be found on the front steps of St. Peter's, but not to promote the lofty efforts of you and your colleagues. In the 500th anniversary of Palestrina, we have hip-hop performed on the front steps of St. Peter. It's a desolation brought about by the spirit of vandalism, the spirit of Judas, and it's embraced by the same prefects who should know better. As such, I don't think we always have the right to complain about blasphemy, only the right to do better. The Catholic story is the greatest story. It remains endlessly fascinating, even to those who hate us. But when we do not tell our story well, or are given the opportunity to tell it well, others will try to tell it for us and generally do a subpar job. To give a few examples, the fact that most Catholics do not know what Fra Angelico looks like, how his artworks appear, or what chant or polyphony sounded like. I didn't hear of Gregorian chant until I was an undergraduate in music. So much for K-12 schooling that my parents shelled out for. Well, that's a self-inflicted wound, right? Or to maybe give some more amusing examples, the fact that many people think Jesus married Mary Magdalene, or that the church kept the supposed amazing truth of the Gnostic Gospels under lock and key for self-protection for centuries, or that Opus Dei is a cult with active assassins in its rosters, or more recently, that a Korean pop group can defeat demons. That's all the rage among grade schoolers right now, somehow. These are all missed opportunities by Catholics to tell our own stories better. But they're also proof of a real spiritual hunger in every culture, including our own. So back to spiritual orientation. Where can we find true knowledge and spiritual orientation in what is an unprecedented cultural mess? Precisely in the arrow of beauty that Benedict XVI wrote about, in the pursuit of the direction of the sweet pain, and what that pain indicates. We find our dignity in crafting arrows for the wounds of beauty. Rootedness. It was pointed out to me recently that much of the struggle and despair we see among young people today is due to their being ethnically and spiritually rootless. Another word is deracinated. Take the average American today, likely many generations removed from any sort of meaningful ethnic connection, and living in an American culture which seems to work over time to deracinate our own culture's expressions. When I teach my online folk music class, I ask students in the first week to post examples of their favorite non-pop folk music, and I usually get things like Bob Dylan or country music. Well, that's not American folk music. Most people don't even know what it sounds like, right? And most of these people are also lacking, if they have any sort of religious experience or lived religiosity, it's very often in a church setting that is also rootless, divided from the depth of its tradition. So the deracinated will seek relief from the resulting vertigo any way they can. Sacred arts help provide a way to rebuild connections. When we create or participate contemplatively in a work of art, we have the opportunity to walk whatever path the work can indicate to us. The work is based firmly in a tradition, as most sacred art is, good sacred art is. We can walk the path which leads back towards the roots of our culture. We can walk forward towards the sweet wound which the work indicates. Right? Every work is like a potential access point to Plato's Ladder of Love or a workshop in Boethius's Musica. There's something profoundly orienting and stabilizing about participating in a clear artistic tradition. So in an era of rootlessness, sacred art manifests stability. It can assuage cultural loneliness, help orient our spirit, and encourage us to look past the present zeitgeist and towards what the culture is actually meant to pursue. Authenticity. So we live in a social system which, at least in theory, enables us to fill our communities with interesting local businesses, organizations, establishments, all of which can celebrate the character and identity of any region. We also all at this moment have supercomputers in our pockets. But instead of real life and vibrancy, what do we see? Most of our communities have mile after mile of repeating corporate wasteland, the same fast food restaurants, discount hotel chains, as far as the eye can see. And what of the supercomputers in our pockets? Perhaps present company excluded, but we all know what those are generally used for, to reinforce the same shared corporate sameness. Yet nowadays, even a lot of those who celebrate pop culture are beginning to notice that it seems to be creatively stuck. And as it recedes from its creative apex, such as it was, we now have the emergence of artificial intelligence, which seems all but ready to effortlessly continue these banal expressions indefinitely. Right? I personally very much welcome such technology because I think it represents the dragon eating its own tail. But I also think it represents a great opportunity for the church in general. And why is it an opportunity? Well, if art is traditionally a means of shared communication and creative action upon a physical medium, and one that's oriented towards a clear goal, then it is also an expression of radical individuality. Right? There's a humanity to be discovered there that AI cannot reproduce. Consider as an example the medium of communication in speech, poetry, or my field, music. The medium of our communication is not the notes on the page, it is air or breath. There's a phenomenological link of sorts between breath and spirit. I have to expel breath or spirit and put patterns upon the spirit, put patterns upon the air to share my interior life with you. There's no other way. It's the only way I can impress what is on my soul, maybe upon yours. Whatever else my intent or my spiritual orientation may be, this must first take place. It's the most primal method of a creative medium. As scripture tells us that God breathed life into the dust and clay to create man and give him life. The artists in the room will, of course, say that God was first a sculptor. Joke. So whether our medium is motion or the freezing of motion, such as in building or painting, the turning of man's creative energies back towards their source is like the completing of a spiritual circuit. So I think we're in the closing years of a great human aesthetic flattening and its homogenized extension now via objects created by AI. And it's precisely human ingenuity, the art of the real, that can gain in value. And the church, in teaching and supporting her artists to complete the spiritual circuit between origin and destiny, something a machine cannot do, has the chance to remain a rare place of real human activity unto beauty himself. and it may soon remain the only place capable of doing so. So there is dignity and opportunity in deeply considered artistic authenticity. Coherence, we're getting there. So we live in an age of hyper-specialization, right, or atomization. Academic disciplines are divided and divided further still into hyper-specializations. It's not necessarily a bad thing. If they soon manage to cure a child's inoperable brain tumor, it will probably be because of some interaction between the observation of hyper-specialists and sort of the growing regathering and resynthesizing of their disparate observations via technology, such as AI. Right? We feel this atomization keenly in the arts as well. There's scant meaningful dialogue between the various disciplines, at least in the secular world. Today's modern composers don't know who the modern playwrights are, or that there are any for that matter, while art students aren't blasting contemporary classical music in their studios. There's a great division that's taken place among the arts, a babel of the arts, if you will. But you may notice that that's not the case with groups like this. Right? We know and we value each other, and we had the propensity to seek each other out and build friendships and connections across disciplines, not just within our own disciplines, even before wonderful groups like the Catholic Art Institute made it so much easier to do so. I think it's because we are a liturgical people. The liturgy is the ultimate work of art. It's what unites us. The composer Richard Wagner thought that in his operas, he had gathered all the arts to himself and achieved the first total work of art, the Gesamtkunstwerk. I have to practice that word a few times every time. But the Mass had him beat by centuries and centuries, combining all of the artistic disciplines together, not for their own sake, but to enter fully into the reality of the deepest drama. So as sacred artists, our finest work points to the finest work of our colleagues in other disciplines. In contemplating the meaning and dignity of your work, I'm able to more deeply enter into the meaning and dignity of my own. And finally, attention. So recently I found myself in a heated online debate. Nothing new. I met Barbara. But the debate was, of all things, was about poetry. And my opponent, who was a real Catholic gentleman and someone who does great good in the world, he was aghast at the poetry of Gerard Manley Hopkins, which he found extravagant, embarrassing, hysterical, and often incomprehensible. Okay. I find it wonderful even when I don't understand it, right? And I don't judge my opponent just because, an artistic vision, if we are crafting a road towards an objective reality that is limitless, perhaps not every path is perceptible for every person. I don't think I have the privilege of being able to understand and perceive all paths towards beauty himself. But that being said, about a week later, I get a call from a group I've worked with in Virginia in the past, Three Notched Road, and their artistic director, Fiona Hughes, asking me to set the very same poem. It's that one. So I'll give you just a moment to read it. I won't read it because I'm scared to read it. But read it for just a moment, and we'll continue. So do kingfishers catch fire? I had an old teacher that couldn't get past the literal imagining of such a scene. It was horrific to him, and he could not, therefore, enter into the spiritual space of the poem. To me, a brutal image never came to mind. That's probably why I like Hopkins. Of course, kingfishers catch fire. Of course they do. The little ordinary sparrows outside of your Midwestern window might catch fire too, if you have the eyes to see it. There are, as the Irish say, the thin places, and Hopkins in his work is giving us a map to the thin places. He's attempting to give poetic expression to the idea that Aquinas presents and the mystics echo, that all of creation coming from a creator bears beauty in its form. Hopkins has perhaps climbed the ladder of love farther than we have and is reaching down a hand to pull us up. He's observing from the realm of musica universalis and reaching down to those of us in lower realms. All great works of sacred art are a potential spiritual shortcut to the mystical vision that we have otherwise not necessarily earned. They allow us to glimpse what we do not deserve so that we may hunger for it more. That is one reason sacred art is both a gift and a mercy when it is done well. So how am I supposed to set such words to music? I have no idea. But I'm trying, and I'm going to take a little give my voice a break here for a second, and I'm going to do something that's somewhat terrifying to me. But I'm going to share a little bit of the early sketch of this poem as I conceived of it. So in the audience is my friend Peter Walker, who some of you heard sing during yesterday's opening mass. He's also a member of Pershing's own Army Choir. The final piece will be for his voice and violin, harp, and flute. But we don't have that whole ensemble, and I've only said a few lines of this. So Peter's going to come up and accompany about a minute or so of this music on his accordion. So thank you, Peter. So my wife and I are some of the biggest members of his fan club, and we've discussed his voice in the past and agreed that a sound which emerges from him seems to also be proof that art is a spiritual vocation. Peter should be occupied with nothing else but the sounding of the instrument God gave him. And it'd be a travesty for him to have to get a so-called real job. I mean it. So all of reality is a living fire, and the artist is here to draw our attention firmly to the majesty of every spirit-saturated speck of reality and predispose us to see things as they really are, even if for a moment. Indeed, I think part of the dignity of art's ability is that there are few things in our life more important than paying attention this way, right? And the person who knows the kingfisher can catch fire has come close to the sacred fire itself. Will a person who feels the heat of the sacred fire hurt another living thing? Will he, as we recently unfortunately saw, kill another man for his political opinion? I don't think he would do anything to risk separation from the sacred fire. I think that is why Hopkins continues that the just man justice is, as if justice were a type of fire, and keeps grace and acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is. What we are doing is drawing attention through our works with our mediums to Christ, who plays, as Hopkins says, in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs, and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. Any direction you read that line is a simultaneous horizontal and vertical contemplation. It is the shape of a cross. and is also a gift and a mercy. Do I have 2 minutes? 2 minutes, I can do it. All right. So I'll read quickly. 20th century's greatest composition teacher, Nadia Boulanger, taught a lot of the composers you may have heard of. Was also a revert to the faith and idea of the communicant. And she said, "What is this force which makes saints, heroes, geniuses, which makes men pursue their destinies to the end? It seems to me that attention is the state of mind which allows us to perceive what has to be. It's the form of the vision experienced by the great mystics on days when they were granted a profound concentration. I have the impression that the more I try to think of the essentials of music, the more they seem to depend on the general human values. It's all very well to be a musician. It's all very well to be a genius. You may have to live a life in which no one understands who you are. Nevertheless, I believe that everything depends on attention. I only see you if I pay attention. I only exist in my own eyes if I pay attention to myself. One always comes back willy-nilly to the great words, have you or have you not received grace? St. Teresa of Avila, afflicted despite everything with arid prayer, has visions. And we say to ourselves, she is mad, it is hysteria. That's very convenient. Was Menuhin hysterical when he played sublimely a sublime movement of a Brahms sonata? No, he received the power to penetrate a thought which is neither Brahms nor his nor mine, a thought floating above the world, bearing light. Floating above the world, bearing light. Or as St. Hildegard, whose feast day we just celebrated, may have said, living as a feather blown on the breath of God. To draw attention to the ineffable is perhaps the greatest dignity of our work. In closing, I sometimes imagine Plato, at the end of his life and perhaps a lengthy purgation, finally ascending his ladder of love to the very top, then crawling onto the shore of the vast sea of beauty which he expected to find. He would also see the birds of fire flying above it. There would be, as Hopkins wrote, the dearest freshness of deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, O morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods, with warm breast and bright wings. Yet Plato might be surprised to also find a single solitary figure standing on the shore of this vast sea of beauty. The man would be clothed in a garment down to the foot and girt with a golden girdle. His head and hairs would be white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes flame. His feet would be like burnished brass, as if fired in a furnace, while his voice would be like the sound of many waters. Kind eyes leading, he would reach out a pierced hand and say to him, as he says to all of us, come, duc in altum, put out into the deep. Thank you.
We're going to keep to the clock, everybody, so I'm going to take 2 questions that I get to ask the first one before I ask y'all, and it'll be fairly simple. I was really struck by the point that you made with respect to in the hyper-specialization that we have today. Artists may know what other artists are doing, but they don't know what playwrights are doing, and they probably can't name it, right? Or composers may know what other composers, because they're the competition, right? Like, you may know what other composers are doing, but you don't know any sculptors. Right? I'm not saying you personally, but just in general. This hyper-specialization is something that I have noticed a lot in my sort of fake world as a journalist, because I'm not a full-time journalist, but people don't read things, and people don't go look at stuff, and people don't, they don't know what they're doing. So what is the responsibility that all of us that are contributing to this need to sort of keep in the front of our minds? In other words, that it's not just that you like Hawkins, it's that you want other people to like Hawkins. I mean, it seems to me that there's an affirmative responsibility that you're advocating for here.
I think it's really natural when you're very young and starting out to be very focused on your career, building your career, getting your education, developing your craft. All those are very good things, right? And at some point, you have to make the transition. We were having dinner with Duncan Stroik yesterday, and he was talking about how happy he is when his own students beat him to get a job.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's that sense of responsibility and friendship, and realizing that even though we are sort of competing in a narrow sphere, the sacred art unfortunately is a narrow sphere at this point, our goal is not to fight amongst ourselves, but to push out to expand the sphere.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the more people that you know that are working in different fields, the more likely it is that you're all sort of setting out into the deep together. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Where's my mic? That seems a sleepy side of the room. Wake up, y'all. Somebody ask a question to this gentleman. All right, there we go. Thank you, Deacon.
Thank you. I've admired your talk. I agree with you that artists do have a vocation, I think, in the real sense that there's a calling from God to do that work. In the same way that seminarians have to go to a seminary to learn theology, philosophy, receive instruction for human formation. I think all of those things are just as necessary for artists as good Catholic men and women need in general. But I asked, and I really don't want to offend anyone, especially where we are, but just 2 weeks ago, we had a collection for the Catholic University of America at all of our parishes throughout the country. And I asked the question, wasn't the arts, both music and fine arts here at the Catholic University of America, founded to do the exact thing that we've talked about, promoting the vocation of artists to work together? I mean, that's why the Pontifical Academy of Music was founded in Rome. Pius XII, on the horizon, saw the collapse of Western culture and wanted sacred music to be preserved. The Catholic University of America was founded for that too. And I don't think it's serving that purpose in the same way that it should, or at least to the extent that it should. And I asked the question, if we're subsidizing, and I think it would be even more subsidized, and people would be even more willing if this institution, for instance, or one of the many Catholic universities that we have, was willing to step up to the plate and say, we want to form artists to be good Catholics, but also to work together collaboratively on these projects. When I was an undergrad, I heard at a public university, they were going to take a trip to Europe to go spend a week painting walls on some old castle that was falling apart. Where's the projects of our young artists working together to go to our poor parishes that can't afford the $20 million renovation?
Yeah.
Working together to build a high altar and promoting in those parishes as well beauty, not just in the one that can't afford the $20 million renovation. So I just asked that question because I do see the vocation of the artist. How do we go from just talking about it here to using the institutions we have and the resources that we have to really promote that beauty in all parts of our Catholic life? Thank you.
So that's another 45-minute talk. So I guess culture is like a glacier, right? It's slow moving and crushes everything in its path. You can't do anything about it until perhaps the temperature shifts and it starts to break apart. Perhaps that's where we are right now. There's a temptation in Catholic academia to be a slightly Catholicized version of yet another public institution. There's perhaps a financial pressure. And perhaps step one is to convince a Catholic institution that a university that bears a name like this one has a responsibility to be primarily Catholic. Maybe we don't need or can't have 8 music programs or 8 architecture programs which train people in that discipline in the light of the faith, but maybe 1 or 2, but fully dedicated is what we need. And so you need visionary leadership, you need people to exert financial pressure, and you need, I think, what's happening in this room is people pursuing their disciplines and vocations to their fullest, and continuing to give witness. And it's like anything else in life. We do the work before us. We don't know what's going to happen with that work. That we leave to God. We just have to continue to pursue quality to the grace. But I think anybody who's in that position, talking with trustees, talking with donors, talking with deans and presidents and vice presidents, they need to be more bold in making the proclamation. They probably won't listen to me say that because they know I want a music department that's fully Catholic or doing sacred music. But there's others who have other parts to play in this story that could perhaps begin to exert more pressure and present more of a vision.
We have time for one more. Ma'am, yes.
So I'll go back to Duncan Stroike's analogy of building the building. And as an interior designer who practiced for 40 years, I can tell you that if I don't know something about engineering, be it electrical, mechanical, structural, civil, the building doesn't get built.
Right.
The whole idea that Deacon Aaron was talking about collaboration, partnership, being willing to reach beyond your discipline and not just know the competition, but actually support each other so a building doesn't get built. So we have no place for art. We have no place for music. We have no place for all the other beautiful arts that should be there. And that's why I think we need to be proactive. in this whole effort. So I have to ask, why is CUA not supporting what Kathleen's doing? You know, I mean, so here we are. so
All garbage.
you know, there's a group of us here from the Basilica of St. Mary who will talk to you later, because the Basilica is a basilica in part because we promote the arts. We don't get named from Rome unless we have certain programs in place. It's not just about the architecture. It's not just about the beauty of the liturgy. It's not just about being faithful to the Chair of Peter. In order to get that nomenclature, you have to put your money where your mouth is. And thank God we have a rector who brought us here today who is a believer in what you're doing. So I guess it's not really a question. But Mark, I commend you, because you and I worked on the Foundation for Sacred Arts many years ago and it never got off the ground well. This time we won't let it fail.
You're here.